The hospital called me at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday and said my wife was in the emergency room. I was at my office 20 minutes away. I grabbed my keys and drove there as fast as I legally could. Heart pounding, mind running through every terrible possibility. What had happened? A fall, a car accident. I had spoken to her that morning over breakfast and she had been perfectly fine. I walked into that emergency room terrified for the woman I had been married to for 26 years. What I found instead ended our marriage, destroyed my business partner, and gave me the most complete and devastating revenge I have ever witnessed anyone execute against themselves through sheer, spectacular stupidity. Welcome to Grandma Payback Stories. I am Grandma, and I am so glad you found this channel. Today's story is about a man named Daniel, his wife Sylvia, his business partner and best friend Carl, and the worst planned hospital visit in the history of marital betrayal. Before we get into this, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Every single week I bring you these stories, and this community means everything to me. Now, let us talk about what Daniel found when he walked through those emergency room doors. Daniel was 57 years old. He had been married to Sylvia for 26 years. They had 3 children, all grown and out of the house. Daniel owned an engineering consulting firm, which he had co-founded 17 years ago with his best friend and college roommate, Carl. The business was successful, genuinely thriving, and Daniel and Carl had been close for so long that Carl was essentially family. He came to holidays. He had been the best man at Daniel and Sylvia's wedding. He was godfather to their youngest. That is the level of trust we are talking about. The hospital that called was not their regular hospital. It was across town. The nurse on the phone said Sylvia had been brought in that afternoon and listed Daniel as her emergency contact. She would not give details over the phone. Daniel drove there in 17 minutes and walked to the front desk and said he was there for his wife, Sylvia Mercer. The receptionist checked the system. She looked confused. She checked again. She told Daniel that Sylvia was in room 14, stable, no serious injuries, and that her husband was already with her. Daniel looked at the receptionist and said, "I am her husband." The receptionist looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone and called room 14. The man who walked out of room 14 30 seconds later was Carl. The 2 men stood in the hallway of the emergency room and looked at each other. Daniel said nothing. Carl said nothing. And in that silence, 17 years of friendship, 26 years of marriage, and every shared holiday and business decision and birthday, cake collapsed completely. Then Carl said, "Daniel, listen, let me explain." Daniel turned around and walked back to the reception desk. He asked, very calmly, whether there was a patient advocate or hospital administrator available. The receptionist, who had clearly understood that something significant was unfolding, made a call. A woman named Maria arrived within minutes. Daniel explained, still very calmly, that a man had identified himself as his wife's husband in order to access her room and her medical information, and that this man was not her husband. He had identification. He had their marriage certificate accessible on his phone via document storage app. He showed Maria everything. Maria's face went very serious. She asked Daniel to wait in a private room. She went to speak to the nursing staff. What emerged over the next hour was illuminating. Carl had arrived at the hospital before Sylvia was even admitted. He had come in claiming to be her husband, given her name and birth date accurately, and been placed in the waiting area. When Sylvia arrived by taxi, he accompanied her to the room. The staff had no reason to question it. He had her information. He was calm and authoritative. He looked like someone's husband. Sylvia had not expected the hospital to call Daniel. She thought she had removed him as her emergency contact the previous week when she had come in for a routine appointment. She had tried to replace him with her sister's number. The update had not processed correctly in the system. The hospital had called the number on file, which was Daniel's cell phone, out of protocol. The affair that had apparently been going on for 14 months had just detonated. Because of an administrative processing delay, Daniel sat in that private room and thought about 14 months. He thought about every business trip Carl had taken, every conference, every time Carl had not been reachable for a few hours. He thought about the times Sylvia had been quieter than usual, more distracted, less present. He had attributed it to empty nest adjustment. He had been considerate about giving her space. He had been, without knowing it, giving them both cover. He asked Maria whether Carl, presenting false identification as a patient's spouse, was a legal issue. Maria said she would need to consult with hospital administration. Daniel said he understood completely and he would wait. What Daniel did in that waiting room over the next 2 hours was methodical and cold and exactly right. He called his attorney first. He explained the situation and asked what his options were. His attorney asked him not to confront Sylvia or Carl directly and to document everything he could. Daniel took photographs of the hospital signage, the timestamp on his phone showing when he arrived, and asked the receptionist if he could get a written statement about the discrepancy in the husband identification. She said she would check with administration. Then Daniel called his accountant. He asked for an immediate audit of the business accounts that he and Carl jointly managed. He did not explain why. His accountant knew him well enough to hear something serious in his voice and said she would begin that afternoon. Then Daniel sat quietly and waited for his attorney to arrive. When the attorney got there, things moved quickly. Hospital administration had been conferring internally, Carl presenting himself falsely as a married patient's husband in order to access her room and medical information was, at minimum, a violation of hospital policy and potentially a HIPAA-related matter. It was also potentially fraud, depending on whether he had signed any documents as her spouse. Administration confirmed he had signed a form that made it a legal matter. Carl was asked to leave the premises by security. He did not go gracefully. He argued in the hallway loud enough for Daniel to hear from the waiting room. He insisted it was a misunderstanding, that he was just there as a friend, that there was nothing inappropriate about his presence. Security escorted him out anyway. Sylvia remained in room 14. She was physically fine. The emergency that had brought her in was a panic attack, which the doctors had ruled out as anything more serious. The irony of that was not lost on Daniel when he was told his wife had come to the hospital because she was having a panic attack, and she had brought her affair partner to hold her hand, and her husband had shown up anyway. Whatever she had been anxious about had just gotten considerably worse. Daniel did not go to room 14 that evening. He went home. He called his children from the kitchen and told them, briefly and without drama, that he and their mother were having serious difficulties and that he would explain more when he could. Then he poured himself one drink and sat at the kitchen table and started making a list. The financial audit came back faster than expected. Daniel's accountant had found something she described on the phone as unusual and worth discussing in person immediately. Daniel went to her office the next morning. What she showed him confirmed that this had not just been an emotional betrayal, it had been a financial one too. Carl had been billing clients through the firm at rates that reflected the full partnership, then routing a portion of the receipts through a separate LLC he had registered 18 months ago. The LLC existed solely to capture overflow billing from clients Carl managed. The clients did not know. The firm's books did not reflect it. Carl had effectively been skimming from their shared business for a year and a half, and the amount he had diverted was just over $230,000. 14 months of the affair 18 months of the financial theft. The timeline overlapped almost exactly. Carl had apparently been building his own separate life on multiple fronts. Simultaneously, Daniel's attorney filed for divorce that week. He also filed a civil lawsuit against Carl for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and misappropriation of business funds. He simultaneously sent documentation to the State Licensing Board for Engineers, noting that Carl had been operating a competing business entity while in a fiduciary partnership without disclosure, which violated their partnership agreement and potentially state professional conduct standards. Then Daniel's attorney reached out to the clients Carl had been billing through the hidden LLC. Most of them were furious. Several of them filed their own complaints. One client, a commercial real estate developer who had been billed improperly for nearly $40,000, filed a separate civil suit. Carl's attorney reached out within 3 weeks, offering to settle. Daniel's attorney told them what Daniel was willing to accept: full repayment of the $230,000. Carl's complete separation from the business with no ownership stake going forward, and a signed non-compete agreement for 5 years. Carl could walk away from the profession he had built for 17 years, or he could fight every lawsuit simultaneously and likely lose everything anyway. Carl signed. He had no real choice. The evidence was to clean and to complete. Sylvia's divorce attorney attempted to claim that the business assets were marital property and therefore subject to division. Daniel's attorney was prepared for this and produced documentation showing the partnership agreement predated the marriage by 2 years and contained explicit language protecting individual ownership shares in the event of dissolution. It held up. The divorce was finalized 11 months after the hospital call. Daniel retained full ownership of the firm, which he restructured, with 2 new junior partners who had been loyal employees for years and had earned the elevation. The business actually grew in the first year after Carl's departure, because the skimming had been a quiet drag on profits that no one had recognized until it stopped. Carl lost his engineering license for 2 years due to the professional conduct violations. His separate LLC was ordered dissolved. His legal fees from the multiple simultaneous lawsuits consumed most of his savings. His marriage, which Daniel had not even known about because Carl had been quietly separated for years, finalized its own divorce proceedings around the same time. Carl had been having a crisis on every front simultaneously and had apparently thought he could manage all of it indefinitely. Sylvia and Daniel's settlement was straightforward, given the prenuptial agreement they had signed, which Carl himself had witnessed and signed as a notary, a detail that Daniel's attorney found grimly amusing when it came up. She received a fair settlement of shared assets, but nothing from the business. She moved to a smaller city to be near her sister and, by all accounts, rebuilt her life quietly and without drama. Daniel took his 3 children to dinner 6 months after the divorce was finalized. He told them the complete story, without bitterness and without casting their mother as a villain, because he genuinely did not feel that she was. She had made choices that destroyed their marriage, yes, but the person who had engineered the most deliberate betrayal had been Carl, who had been his friend first, who had taken his trust and used it as camouflage for almost 2 years. He told his children this. The hospital called because of a clerical error, a phone number that had not updated properly in a database. This is what brought it all down. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a detective, not a suspicious spouse checking messages at midnight. A glitch in a hospital record system. His youngest daughter asked him how he felt about that. He thought about it and said it this way: Carl and Sylvia had 14 months and a lot of careful planning, and a phone number that did not update brought them down in an afternoon. There is something almost funny about it. Once enough time has passed, he is still waiting for enough time to pass for it to be funny. but he is getting there. If this story had you gripping your seat from beginning to end, hit that like button and subscribe to Grandma Payback Stories right now. New episodes every week. Drop a comment below and tell me the detail that shocked you most. Was it Carl at the hospital? The financial theft? The timing? Let me know. Grandma wants to hear from you, and this community is the best part of my week. See you next time.